Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the channel. I wanted to come on here and just film my November wrap up for you. I know we're about halfway into December, but just with different things coming up, it is a little delayed this month. But I did want to go ahead and talk about the four different books that I got a chance to read this past month. So, the first two that I wanted to talk about are finishing up the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy. I finished up Hero of Ages this month. And I thought this was an amazing conclusion to this first trilogy. I think that it left a lot of doors open for the future, the future books that Sanderson has planned in schedule. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what he comes up with next for the series. I think that this definitely was my favorite of the three. I thought that the ending had the potential to be a little rushed, but the way that Sanderson pulled it off, I think it was an excellent ending. And if you know, you know, definitely made me a little emotional at the end, which is always appreciated after you've gone on such a long journey with these characters. So that was one of the books I finished up for this month, The Hero of Ages, the conclusion to the first era of Mistborn. And then, along with that, after finishing up Hero of Ages, I went ahead and read Mistborn Secret History. Now, there is a lot of debate on whether you should read this after Mistborn Era 1 or after Era 2. I went ahead and read this after the first era just because I had already read Stormlight, and I think I already kind of got the reveal that was going on. And so I wanted to go ahead and read this since I was fresh off of that Firstborn era. Since there are some spoilers involved in this, I won't talk about it too much, but there were definitely a lot of moments in this book that I loved. And I think that reading this after Era 1 was a great place. So if you're moving forward with Mistborn, I go ahead and recommend checking this out pretty early in the Mistborn trilogy. So that was the second book I finished this month, Mistborn Secret History. The next book that I finished for the month of November was Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. And I've had this one on my radar for a good little bit. The guys over at A Life on Books have talked about this book very highly. And earlier this year, I did read 100 Years of Solitude, and I know that this book was an incredible inspiration on Marquez for that book. He, even with this copy, wrote the foreword to this book. And we kind of see some similar themes. We see a lot of discussions about family history, and there's definitely some hints here and there about you're starting to see some magical realism elements. So I did kind of like this book. To be honest, I didn't like this book as much as I thought I was going to. It kind of left me wanting a little bit. Going into this, I wasn't aware of how the narrative was structured. And so at the beginning, that definitely led to a lot of confusion. So just be aware of that if you are going into this. And getting into some discussions about the story here. So, spoilers if you are really serious about that. Although I think this book is, despite its size, really rewards multiple readings. And so I don't think spoilers are really going to affect your time too much. But one thing that I personally connected with this is being from a small town originally, and you kind of see a lot of discussions about people staying in that town or leaving that town and what that can do to that kind of community. And so that was one theme in here that I really liked. And going along with that, I'm not entirely sure that the author mentioned it, but being from the small town, it's like I'll always have those memories of growing up in a very small town, and a lot of the people I grew up with are still there and everything. But for me, that town is just kind of memories at this point, and I don't know how often I'll go back. But the town still exists, and people still make a life there and moves forward without me. And so my memories of that place aren't necessarily the current reality for the people who live there. And so that's one theme in the book that I really liked and felt very personal. Kind of going back to some of the confusion in the book, one thing that I got wrong was I would get names of characters wrong a lot in this. And so it was difficult, but also challenging and rewarding trying to keep up with characters and who is actually alive and who's dead and who maybe has given their name to their children and seeing how names are passed down. And so there is a lot in here that I did really like. My initial read was pretty lukewarm, but like I said, I think this is one that rewards multiple rereadings. And I was motivated to pick this up through a book club, and so I think I'll probably go to that. I think having discussion with others is another thing can help you get even further into this book, and just rewards that again, despite it being a pretty short novel here. So that was Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. And the last book that I read for the month of November was The Safekeep by Jelle Vanderwooden. And this is one of the books that I mentioned in my 10 Before the End video. So go and check that out if you want to see some of the other books that I'm currently working on. And I absolutely loved this book. This is easily probably one of my favorites for the year and potentially one of my favorite books I've read. There are some issues that I had with it. Notably, some of the changes that take place in our main character, Isabel, do seem maybe a little bit rushed with what we get here in the story. Again, fairly short novel. That being said, I think that the author did give justification for that. And so I'm not terribly upset about that, although that has kind of seemed like a sticking point for some people. Trying to not give too much away about this book, and so it may be a little difficult to actually talk about. One thing I did really want to highlight is our main character and some of the changes that we see her go through. And I think that a lot of those changes kind of delve, and this is a more minor theme in this book, but kind of delve into how quickly we can judge other people without giving them the time of day. And there's a quote here that I wanted to highlight because I love it in terms of Isabel's character and how it kind of highlights that theme. So the quote that I have here highlighted is, "No one knew of her heart and no one knew of her grief, and it was torture." And the reason that I really like that quote with the book here, but also a wider message, is I think that it kind of highlights a lot of the internal struggle that can go on within us that people day to day don't really know what's going on because, especially now in a social media age, it's so easy to just scroll through and it's really hard to make time for people as much as we should and as much as we would probably like to. And so that's one thing that I really liked in here. I don't want to give too much away, so I probably won't go further because there are a couple really big reveals in here that I think add so much to the story. So kind of good to go into it without knowing too much. But again, absolutely love this book. It takes place in the 1960s, I believe, post World War II in the Netherlands. And so there are a lot of discussions about kind of the fallout from World War II and particularly in the Netherlands. And one thing that I really liked about this book is I didn't know much about what happened in the Netherlands during World War II. And so it kind of inspired me to look into a little bit of that history. And so that's something that I'm going to kind of keep an eye on moving forward as a topic that I'm interested in. I'll also be keeping an eye out for any future stories from this author. Absolutely love this book. One of my favorites. Highly recommend it. And so those were the 4 books that I read for the month of November. I did start 1 or 2 other ones, but ended up not really DNFing, but just kind of decided to move on to other books for the time being. So I'll probably return to those. Nothing much to mention. Thank you for checking out the video. I really appreciate any comments or any feedback. And I'll probably end up posting a best of year list here coming up in the next couple of weeks. Around the holidays is always a little crazy with traveling and stuff, but we'll try to do my best to get that out to y'all pretty soon. Thanks for checking out the video, and hope you have a good day.